Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Cinephile. We have a very special episode for you today. We are going to be talking about the Ten Commandments. Well, not like from the Bible. Well, I guess it is from the Bible, but specifically the 1956 version with Charlton Heston. Jake, I know you've seen this before. How many times do you think you've watched Charlton Heston play Moses?
I've seen it 40, 50 times probably. It's one of those that, have I seen it all the way through 40, 50 times? No, because
Right.
this movie is 3 hours and 39 minutes long. That would be a long viewing to watch it 40 times. But this is a movie that you see commonly on TV this time of year because today is Passover. A happy Passover to those who celebrate, and then this coming Sunday is Easter. So it's commonly shown on TV. It's been shown on TV for years around this time. So I've seen parts of it many times. But it is a bit of a slog to get through. So all the way through, about probably, I don't know, 20 times. But I'm glad we're doing it for the podcast because I realized watching it through and attentively watching it through for this that I was like, dang, this really is like a pretty good movie.
Yeah,
For how long
I
it is.
completely agree. I completely agree. I obviously I've seen this before, but I couldn't tell you the last time that I had seen it all the way through. When I went to try and find it's not really available free anywhere. And so I had gone on Amazon and it popped up as I had bought it. So I was like, yes, I had forgotten I had bought it. But I only got halfway through, I guess, the last time I watched it because it popped up and it was like, you still have an hour and 30 to go. And I was like, no, I don't. I need to watch the whole thing again. Um, but yeah, this is a classic in my family. We watch it every year. Um, and and so I was just glad to get to it after, we've been doing this a couple months now
Mhm.
consistently. So watching more of an epic as opposed to kind of some of the movies we have been watching is an interesting change of pace for sure.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about that. But yeah, I know, Jake, I know you've got some fast facts
Yeah.
for us. And
So
yeah, go ahead.
just to jump right into it here. So this is made by director Cecil B. DeMille, one of the great names of early Hollywood, right? He's
No
part of
doubt.
really the founding of Hollywood and really got his start in silence, making silent movies, and then was able to make the transition from silence to to sound movies, to talkies as they call them,
Right.
which you saw more directors being able to make that jump than you saw actors and
Talent.
actresses because we found out that some of these people who look very majestic on screen don't sound so majestic on a microphone. So, but
Shout out to
anyways,
Singing in the Rain for
yes,
essentially, yeah, that's how I know
exposing
that.
all of that, exposing all that. But this is actually the second film that Cecil B. DeMille made by the name The Ten Commandments, but this is not a remake. So the original, did I write down the year?
It's from the 20s.
1923 is the original Ten Commandments, or should I say the first Ten Commandments that he made.
And this is the second Ten Commandments.
Yes.
It's like the Bill of Rights, but biblical.
Okay, kind of. Um, the first Ten Commandments though is it deals with the Exodus story, Moses, Pharaoh, the Jews leaving Egypt. But then it's like that part's almost like told in flashback, and then there's this modern day part to that story. So it's really not, this really isn't a remake of that. You could say it's a remake of part of that. Um, I'd choose to look at it as DeMille is fleshing out that story that he told part of back in 23. Now in 56, he's fleshing it out and telling the full story of it. There's a lot of research that went into the making of this film. I have it on DVD. I actually have it right here.
There we go.
That was not planned. I just haven't taken out of my player yet, and that's right behind me. The version I have, and I think this is how it was theatrically released, starts with Cecil B. DeMille coming out and basically giving like a pre-screening talk about the movie. And I found it very interesting because he talks about how when you look at just what's the story of Exodus just written in the Bible, it's left it doesn't really it leaves a gap, shall we say, the gap between, you know, when Moses was a baby and cast in the river to then when he finds out his true heritage. There's a gap in there. And so through different ancient historians, there's been, you know, we can collect facts and things about ancient Egypt. And through that, what I'm getting to here is there was a few books about that this is kind of based on, that they developed this story from. This really delving into the story of Moses and who was Moses, you know, not just as a biblical figure, but as a person and as a character. Other fun facts I have. So we talked about how this is an epic, and I definitely agree. Like, this fits the epic in so many ways. But they had an epic amount of extras on this movie. They reportedly 14,000 extras used on this movie, and 15,000 animals. That's like mind-boggling. That's mind-boggling.
What,
you know how much food? You know how much food they had to bring in on set to feed all those people? Like, that's insane. Lord. But then when you see the scene when they leave Egypt, like, you can really understand, like, there's a lot of people on this screen. You know, like, there's a lot of people in this scene, and they really just put everything on such a grand scale. And I think that is the epitome of this movie. You can sum up this whole movie by saying everything is on a grand scale. Right?
And you know, absolutely. And I think, well, I didn't know that there were that many people on it, because at the time,
I don't know if that's fact per se, but that's kind of the legend, and I think it's plausible.
I think it's really plausible. As
another
camera,
week of another
week, another.
When's that tripod coming in the mail?
Yeah. Somebody wants to Venmo me money for a new tripod that isn't a gimbal. Anyway, I didn't realize how many extras were on this. Obviously, this was the 50s, and you notice it was just so grand in scale and scope, but I wasn't exactly sure how they did it. I would notice specifically in this movie, I mean, there's a lot of matte painting, blue screen, green screen in this movie to try and give it that epic scale. But every time I would look at some of these smaller characters and they're all moving. So it makes sense that there are so many, but that for a film today, having a crew of that many people, having a cast of that many people, then crew to take care of that many people. I mean, I couldn't tell you the last time that many people were in the film.
It's insane, because like, and it's very DeMille, because like, he's famous for having like 4 cameras shoot one scene, when like usually you'll have like 2 cameras, right? You'll be shooting on 2 cameras. Sometimes, you know, depending on the production, you just got 1. But he's famous for having 4 or 5 cameras on some things. So it's very DeMille, and it's something that I feel like only DeMille could do, because who else in Hollywood then or since could, by a snap of their fingers, say, I need 14,000 people.
And that's a liability.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's like first and foremost a liability. But yeah, no, that's really interesting. And you know, because this film is an epic.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what that means, I kind of wrote it down. So Charlton Heston's son, who plays the boy Moses, like in the basket Moses, did an interview, and he kind of talked about the
Don't tell me he
fact.
remembers this.
No, but he kind of talked a little bit about how it was an epic, and so there was a part of this where it talks a little bit about what an epic film is. So it says an epic film focuses on the journey of a single character. Protagonist is typically a historical figure or a mythical hero. A large number of people, often entire societies, 14,000, woohoo, are dependent on the success of the protagonist's journey on an epic film. The action in an epic film takes place on a large, grandiose scale, again, at 14,000. Epic films feature sweeping, complex, and often symphonic musical scores, and ornate costume and set design is essential on an epic film. So I wanted to mention that. We'll talk about that just a little bit later as well. But in our talking about our kind of fast facts, it makes sense because an epic film almost requires that. And you don't see a ton of epic films today.
Really, the only other fast fact I have is it's been long debated and argued who the voice of God is because it's not credited. Let me start off with this. A lot of people have claimed to have done the voice of God on this. Heston did the voice of God in the burning bush. We've been able, through modern editing software, you can go back and do this yourself. You can find the clip and modulate the pitch up from because it's a very booming kind of voice. And if you modulate
could you do that again?
It's a very booming voice. Talk into the microphone.
I am God. I'm in a bush, and I'm Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
And
you done there, God?
Morgan Freeman is the only voice of God,
Exactly.
I know. Yeah, I was gonna try and do my Morgan Freeman.
Don't.
I never. He said, just for once, don't do the impression. Just once, please don't do it. You're wondering why no girls call you. It's because you always do the impression.
Oh, mercy. Anyways, so in the bush, it's pretty believable that it's Heston that did the voice, and Heston even says he does it. Now Heston says he did it the whole time, I'm pretty sure. And if you do the same process for God on the mountain, on Mount Sinai, it's different, and you can even hear it's a little different of a voice. So
interesting.
That one, there different people have speculated who that is.
It'd be really funny if it was just like a random guy.
I think
DeMille, like one of the 14,000. He was like, "Hey, come on over here," and then we'll never say anything. And then people for centuries will debate whose this voice it is, and they won't be able to figure it out.
Well, that was the thing. That was the whole reason it's not credited as the voice of God, because DeMille thought it would be blasphemous or would be too risky to have, I guess, someone play God, which I understand in one way, but on the other way, I'm like, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, but that also is that really tracks with the way this movie was made.
Yeah.
Because like there's so much detail in the way in which they tell the story where they really are trying not to be blasphemous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't describe it other than it's very obvious that they are trying to be very intentional
reverent
about the way
how I describe it.
Yeah, very reverent in the way they're telling the story, and that definitely tracks with the mid 50s. And the amount of people that were in church at that time or were churched at that time, it makes sense that they just wanted to show that reverence. Because because kind of going off of that, one of the other things that um I don't know why I thought his name was Fester. No, Charlton Heston's son. I think it starts with an F, but Freeman.
I don't know.
He says, and I'm going to quote this because I think this is good. It says, "It brings that Bible story to life. You can get it in Sunday school. You can read the Bible all you want, but DeMille went out of his way to use all of the technology that Hollywood had to bring to this story, to life in a colorful, vibrant, spectacular, yet believable way. Everything that happens in that movie, you buy into it in the context of the story." And I think that's really key because this is one of the most well-known epic films ever. There were more religious epics, but for some people, they didn't obviously they had the 1923 version, but that wasn't accessible really for a lot of people. So this was, other than the times you read it in your Bible, this was like the only other time you would ever see Moses, and you'd actually see it kind of in live action. And even though it's not necessarily historically or biblically accurate all the time, it's something that you would be able to kind of see the scale and the scope. And that's why I think it works perfectly for an epic film.
You bring up, how accurate is this? Like I said, the Bible leaves a big gap in Moses's life.
Which is savage because Moses is the one that wrote it.
Yeah.
wrote the portion. He wrote Exodus and Genesis. And so he just was like, you know what? Nobody needs to know about the first 50 years of my life.
We're
just gonna forget that.
We're gonna skip the Egyptian part.
Yeah.
Which okay, is it important? No. But understanding Moses as a person, I want to know that. I find it interesting. And I think, obviously a lot of people find it interesting because they've made, this movie. They've made there's Prince of Egypt. Excellent.
Which is a great film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very good. I did miss the songs in this one.
I low key was kind of thinking that too. I was like,
all of those songs hit.
Yeah.
They all hit so good. But
what's funny is that the guy who plays Seti in this, the person who plays Seti in Prince of Egypt is Patrick Stewart.
And
he's bald.
Yeah.
And white. And this guy is bald and white. So I just kept thinking, I was like, it'd be really funny if they just deep faked Patrick Stewart over this guy. Because it really would have been probably a pretty similar performance, but I just kind of thought that was ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but
go ahead.
The Bible, Exodus leaves that gap, and they were able, history, we've pieced together some things about Moses's life. But really, that's thousands of years ago. That's we're talking I'm the history nerd. I'm the history nerd. I should know this. 4,000 years
6,000. 4 to 6,000 years ago. Yeah.
So the amount of information that we have surviving from that time, there's going to be a lot of gaps there. And I think I can't talk to the history per se, because I've not studied this. I'm not big on my Egyptian history, but as far as biblically, I don't see anything in this movie in its portrayal of Moses or any of our other characters or people, shall we say, that show up in the Exodus story. I don't see anything here that would contradict what's in the Bible.
It's interesting you mentioned that. One of the things I wrote down in my notes is it's widely believed, and I don't think it's necessarily outright stated, but it's widely believed that Moses had a stuttering problem, that he wasn't a great public speaker. And obviously Charlton Heston is this, he's one for the ages when it comes to that. His voice and the way his cadences is almost as well known as Orson Welles in that time period.
Yeah.
So I would say I think the Egypt stuff is interesting, but I don't think it was like that. I don't think he was as well spoken. But if you look at the way in which Egypt comes across, obviously it kind of looks a little Egyptian, but I feel like it's closer to, at least with the soldiers, more Roman. Um,
Yeah.
and the reason I mention that is because for the audience at the time, they probably would have understood that more
Mhm.
than straight Egyptian. But yeah, so there are like a couple of things where I I do think one thing that is accurate. Well, I think he was probably more arrogant.
Who, Moses?
So Moses in the beginning, I think he was probably way more arrogant and not as self-righteous. I think one of the notes I wrote again was he's too righteous of a character, which obviously is in line with an epic.
Mhm.
But if it was going for more realism, I don't think he's that righteous because up until he finds out he's a Hebrew, he's Egyptian.
Mhm.
So for you to just have that flip that switch,
Yeah.
it that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And obviously, in the scheme of this story, it works because he treats them better to begin with.
Mhm.
But I think some of those elements kind of make him more of a heroic, self-righteous, or a righteous character. When I doubt that that's what really happened. Um, but yeah, I mean, still, regardless, I think it's interesting they spend so much time on that portion of his life.
Yeah,
I thought that it rounded out his character well.
for sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
you and I talked about this on the phone. You're like, this movie's too long.
Yeah.
Like this movie should have been called like The Exodus, not the Ten Commandments. Like it starts
Yeah.
when like,
Because okay, this this movie is too long. I will say that. And we've already made the comparison to Prince of Egypt. That movie ends after they escape Egypt. The Pharaoh's army is swallowed up by the Red Sea, and the Jews make their escape. That's where that movie ends. This movie lingers on, and we go to Mount Sinai, get the
for
Ten
like another half an
Commandments.
hour.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
okay, if you're gonna call the movie the Ten Commandments, you got to go to Sinai and get the Ten Commandments. Yes, I understand that. But as far as overall story, I don't understand why we have to go that extra half hour.
Well, if you read about this film on Wikipedia, even it says that the main antagonist is Ramesses,
Yeah.
and that conflict is essentially resolved by the end of the parting of the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go, and then the last half an hour, there's a new antagonist, which is the people of Israel. So you're flipping after 3 hours of one guy as the essential antagonist of the film. You're flipping it for the last 30 minutes to a complete other section.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have Dathan, who kind of is a through line through that, and so it's easier to put him kind of in the hot seat of the antagonist of this portion. But we've spent 3 hours focusing on the relationship and the conflict between Moses and Ramesses, which I think is great
Mm-hmm.
and really interesting. And then, but that's not where we end. The climax, the end of the film, yeah,
we go past our resolution, and that is a big problem for me in movies. I think I find it really off-putting when movies and directors specifically don't know where their story naturally ends. Right? We continue on for no reason. So I see it as no reason. It doesn't add anything. If anything, it takes away from the story for me. So that, like I said, yes, you can't call this movie the Ten Commandments and not make it all the way to Sinai and get the Ten
right. But
Commandments.
you also can change the name of
Yeah,
the film. Like it's not like okay,
that happens
we
all
have
the
to
time.
yeah, yeah. Return of the Jedi, Revenge of the Jedi, Return of
Yeah.
the Jedi again. Yeah,
So
yeah. Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat. All You Need Is Kill. Like that. Those are three different titles for the same movie.
yeah. So
All You Need Is Kill. That's
bad. That's
yeah,
just bad grammar in
yeah.
general.
Also, a movie called Live, Die, Repeat is it's not a great movie title either. But so I guess Edge of Tomorrow works best out of the three of those. But
Yes.
yeah, I think even, and I don't know, like especially with this being an epic, that just makes some of the choices for the story like they weren't necessarily focused, I think, on story. Like, because the first part they really are, because there's not a lot of biblical evidence
Hmm.
for some of these, the beginning of Moses' life, really. Um, and but by the end, I mean, it's really trying to, it's almost like um propaganda is not the right word, but it's almost like a rah, you know,
Yeah,
we, we're Jews
it's
and we're Christians kind of thing, which
yeah.
maybe that's why I love it so much. But it really is that um the first part, it's almost like there's a switch.
Hmm.
And the first part really is a character study of Moses, even though the character probably isn't exactly accurate, to the second half being really a telling of the Exodus story
Yeah.
and trying to be pretty accurate based on the Bible. I mean, you have a David Attenborough style voiceover for as God,
Yeah.
for like, or actually, I guess it wouldn't be God for the portions where it's like essentially rereading scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's DeMille's voice there. He's narrating it.
yeah.
Um, and I wonder if
Um,
he's just like, everyone got tired and we ran out of money finally, so we're just gonna sum this up in a voiceover, and there you go.
well, it's interesting you mentioned money because this movie was the most expensive movie ever made at the time. So it was
Doesn't
made for,
surprise me in the
no,
least.
at all. It was made for $13 million, which today is equivalent to around $145 million. And it made 122.7 million in its theatrical
Wow.
run, which is equivalent to 1.2 billion.
Wow.
So yeah.
It made
Um
money.
yeah, it made a lot of money. Where's the sequel? Um
It's called the oh shoot, it's the what's the which Veggie Tales is it? What comes after that? That's when after this is when isn't that when we go to
I guess it'd be Josh and the Big Wall.
yes, thank you. Joshua and the Big Wall. That's the sequel.
Yeah, that's legend. And it's even to kind of go into some of these characters,
Yeah.
as we're talking about it, like moving forward. Um, Joshua is a total Chad.
Yeah.
He's a total. What's interesting is they almost went. It's like, okay, here are the main name characters that you will know. It's like they're all gonna know each other automatically, and
Yeah.
it's like that's not necessarily how it worked. I actually thought it was a really interesting decision to have the reason Moses killed an Egyptian was to save Joshua.
Yeah.
That actually, like, low key, is fascinating.
Hmm.
Obviously, again, we wrestle with the idea of, okay, an epic has to kind of hit these tenets that I mentioned earlier, but that also may sacrifice how biblically accurate it is.
Hmm.
But that was a change I actually really liked. Um, but I mean, he's a total Chad. And I wrote that Dathan is such a beta.
Yeah. He
I,
really like the thing that comes to mind when I think of Dathan is rat.
yeah,
He calls himself a rat. Ramses calls him a rat. He is a rat though. Like even like how they did the makeup for Edward G. Robinson. Like he looks kind of like a rat.
yeah, he looks like like he. I text you. I was like, he's the OG Wormtail
He is such a conniving, slimy little ugh. I
Weasel.
can't yeah, weasel. Thank you.
Yeah, he
Um,
literally he's the worst. He's
but
the worst.
Dathan has one of the funniest moments. There's not a lot of humor in this whole movie, but Dathan has the funniest moment. I laugh every time when it's after the night when the spirit of death comes and takes away the firstborn of
Uh huh.
every household that didn't have lamb's blood. And so the Egyptian guards show up at Dathan's door because Joshua goes and paints the blood on Dathan's door because he's taken Lilia. I believe that's her name.
Yeah.
and he's taken her as his.
He's got the hots for it.
Yes. I'm trying to think. Concubine, would that be the proper term?
Yes, but they mentioned multiple times, like the amount of innuendo they kind of do in this
Yeah.
movie. Like they mentioned multiple times, it was of her own free will. But I think at one point, Joshua literally just says, "Dathan." She goes, "Yes." It's like nowadays I know exactly what he's
Yeah.
saying. Uh, but as a kid, I would that would have gone over my head.
Yeah. It did go from
Um,
my head.
yeah, and I mean,
Um,
by the end, this dude is such a savage that he gets to Mount Sinai, turns on Moses, and then sacrifices Lilia.
yeah.
He's like, you know what? She's the one that's getting
Yeah.
sacrificed. It's like, dude, what is your deal, bro?
It's so messed up. But
It really is.
the funny moment, back to that, getting back on track here. Um it, the Egyptian guards show up and there's blood on Dathan's door because Joshua went and painted it to
Yeah.
save Lilia. And he's like, "Why are there guards at my door? There's no blood on my door." And then they're like, "Well, does the rock bleed?" And he comes out and he's just like, "Oh my gosh, like what's going on?" Like he's freaking out because he's like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm gonna get something bad's gonna happen. Like guards are at
Right.
my door." And then he's like, and he's yelling at Lilia and he's like, "You're gonna walk all the way to," and he turns and looks at the guard and he says, "Where are we going?" And like the delivery of that line, like God bless Edward G. Robinson for the delivery of the way he just looks at the guard and says, "Where are we going?" And the guard says, "To hell, I hope."
Yeah, I know.
Which
And he
I'm
walks
like,
away.
I'm like, you don't even believe in hell, but okay.
Yeah, that's I mean, they do a really good job with characters in this.
Yeah.
I think
I
we
will
even oh go ahead.
I will say the different characters and how they play into each other. I think this really succeeds at. Now, I will say all these characters seem painted with a rather wide brush.
I agree.
They are all they each they're not even I would say these aren't so much characters as people, they're characters as
Like
themes
archetypes.
or
Yeah.
yeah, archetypes. They have a purpose in the story and purpose in their intersection with all the other characters. So in that aspect, yes, I love the way all these come together and interweave. But the reason I think we have so many characters is if we would have just had a few characters, these are pretty wide cut characters, if you will.
Right.
So I there's not a lot of complexity to them, and I don't think the movie would stand up to only having a few central characters.
And I mean, we even talked about when we were texting back and forth, like Nefertiri is definitely like a femme fatale,
Oh my gosh, yes,
which makes her so much more interesting than
she is
kind
the
of like
most
a damsel.
she is the most interesting character in this whole movie. I upon my rewatch, like she is the one I notice. And
I
like
agree.
I've always kind of noticed her because I was always like, she's different. That's interesting. But and I wrote this down. She literally goes from she's throwing rose petals in love with Moses, the first scene we see her in.
Yeah.
Moses is returning from Ethiopia. She's throwing rose petals out the window and like, "I'm so in love." To one of the last scenes we see from her, she's handing Ramses a sword and says, "Bring me his blood on this sword."
Right.
And I'm just like,
And
the
you still
switch.
don't even really know yeah, but she could also like the amount of times she's kind of bluffed
Yeah.
and like had like flipped her motives.
Oh
You're
yeah.
like, okay, like does she really want his blood on his sword, or is she just saying that to play into getting something else?
Yeah.
But no, she's so thirsty for Moses.
And like
It's wild.
even when Moses comes back, like she's full on like Ramesses' wife and mother of his child. Moses
And she
comes
said,
back.
"Hello there."
Moses comes back and she's like, "Hey, baby."
He's going to remember me.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's yeah. So she's a very very interesting character.
Yeah.
So now it is time for our rosebud and thorn. Jake, this is a long movie. Got any rosebuds and or thorns?
So I have three roses actually. So
That is
first,
acceptable because it is a long movie.
one for each hour. Um,
In this Watching this movie in one sitting it is a slog,
it's
especially if you're like alone
oh
watching
my
it, like you're
gosh,
just by
yeah,
yourself.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Solitary confinement. So my first rose goes to Yul Brynner. I think he gives yeah, I'm gonna say he gives the best performance out of anyone
I agree.
in this movie, which there's a lot of characters as we've said, so I think giving the best performance is tough. I think in the first part of this movie, he's close with Charlton Heston. I think their conflict is really interesting in the first half. I think Heston goes flat in the second half when he returns to Egypt. I think he's um very like distanced and very um
Yeah, you had
it's
told me that, and when I watched that part, I kind of I think it's because it's trying to be more biblically accurate, to be
yeah,
honest with you, as
it
opposed
just
to the first half.
it feels stale compared to the
Yeah,
first half to me. um and I think in that second half, Yul Brynner steals every scene the
he's
two of
so
them
good.
have. He is
He's
good.
so good.
He's incredible for this movie. So that's my first rose. My second rose, we've talked about Anne Baxter's portrayal as Nefertiti. That's my second rose, just because the fact of adding like that character that she plays so well, which is not typical of Anne Baxter. You know, this is she had said at one point that she was very thankful to get this role because it kind of helped her break out of typecasting in some of her earlier roles, most of her earlier roles prior to this, getting to play a more morally ambiguous
Sure.
character. But I think just adding this character of really like, you don't think of having sexual tension in a biblical epic, but
It's there.
it's
It's there.
in the first half, like it is there for sure.
When
And
she
so
when she kisses Yul Brenner, I was like, sort of reminds you what you're not getting. I was like, dude, what a
that
savage.
was yeah,
That was
that was
savage.
so savage. And so I really like that character. And then my third rose is gonna go to the score written by none other than Elmer Bernstein. I love Elmer Bernstein so much. He did a lot of scores. Really,
Yeah.
the golden age of Hollywood. The soundtrack is written uh in a lot of ways by Elmer Bernstein. I wrote on my sheet of notes that Elmer Bernstein walked so John Williams could run.
Yeah.
Uh, and I really think that you don't have a John Williams without someone like Elmer Bernstein that really um, made music an important part of a lot of really important movies, you know, help the music stand up and provide emotional gravity and direction for this
And this
for
does
movies.
that in spades.
Oh my gosh.
It
This
is so good.
You want to look at this as just like a piece of music. I love this soundtrack. Like even
Oh
just
yeah.
purely as a piece of music. But then add in like what a score is supposed to do and how it's like fits character and like supports the story narrative and supports gives you emotional guidance, if you will. It's so good in this movie. I love it so much. And it's funny you talk about how long this movie is. I got bored with it towards the end, and so I started making dinner, and so I had it just playing. And my roommate had come home from work, and I'm looking at Tanner and I'm telling him everything that happens because of what I can hear the music doing.
Yeah.
And like that's just a testament to how good this is and how like yes, I've seen this a number of times, but like you can tell like the beats of the story by what the music's doing, and I think that's just the mark of an incredible score.
I think like really quickly, I think that the score of a movie is almost like makeup, right? If you have a really good score, it can kind of cover up some flaws
Yeah.
and make it seem like a much more attractive package than
Mhm.
without it. But if you
Yeah.
have a really bad score, it makes it look, even a great film, like a great edit,
Mhm.
can fall flat
Yeah.
because
No,
the
I'd
score is.
agree. I'd agree. My bud is I already mentioned it, Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
Specifically the performance in the second half once he comes back. Like, I get it. I understand what his character's trying to do. I just think there's no his performance is just so flat in the second half. And I think because so much of the second half is him playing against Ramesses, the whole conflict of let my people go. No, that whole conflict, I think he just gets swept away by Yul Brynner's performance. So
I
that
agree.
is disappointing. I like him in the first half, the first part, like really up until he gets to the burning bush. I really like him, and then it's after that it's just something goes away from me. And then my thorn is it is too long, and it is not only too long, like it drags its feet through some of these things. Like I feel like there's a number of like smaller scenes that it's like, all right, we can pick this up a little bit. And I think honestly, like the reason like it gets bogged down in too many scenes is because we have so many characters that we're introduced to, and we have to. I think there's this feeling that we have to flesh all these characters out a bit and like have them tell each their own story and how it's woven into this bigger story, which is interesting. But when you have just that many characters, it slows down our story pace, I think.
I think, yeah, I honestly, to kind of give you an example of that, when the Israelites are leaving Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
that sequence is way too long
Oh yeah.
because it just cuts to different people and different people and different people and different people. And it's like
Yeah.
you could have cut at least 5 minutes out of that sequence and still get the idea across.
Yeah.
But it's almost because this is an epic and it is very romantic in a way, in the way in which it tells the story. It kind of is it's very heavy handed and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And it makes sense for the genre, but that makes a long, that makes for a long runtime.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, for me, one of my roses is the score. I agree with you. I think it elevates this movie so much, and I honestly think that's one of the reasons why I like it so much.
I
There's
think
some music
the
like okay,
score. I talk about how this is an epic. I think the score is one of the most epic parts about this movie. I think it it has the bombasticism, it has the grandeur, the full orchestra feeling that like
yeah,
really it stands up to all this production design and all this layering. And there's honestly, as we've said, if you haven't been listening, this is a long movie. We've said it
yeah.
multiple times, but like pumping out so much music to be able to fill that whole runtime is just incredible.
I also would say another rose for me is the production design, which might seem weird because there isn't a lot of verisimilitude necessarily. It's very clearly a lot of it is shot on sound stages, but it's just so classical Hollywood,
Yeah.
and I just appreciate it for that so much. Um, and I guess this could kind of tie into this was shot, I believe, in Technicolor, and so
I'm pretty sure.
it's the like the vibrancy of the colors too. It's just very. This is a kind of a dark story
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it. So to kind of get these bright colors and the score, I don't know, it just all kind of worked for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I really like that. My bud um, is the dialogue. I'm not going to put it as a thorn because I liked it, but it is not how people speak.
Mm-hmm.
That is not. It's very Shakespearean,
Yeah.
um, and which is reflective of the genre that it's in. But at the same time, like Moses, like low key speaks in riddles and questions half the movie.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I know you wouldn't talk like this. And it's just kind of heavy handed the dialogue sometimes. But I do enjoy that it's kind of regal.
Mm-hmm.
I think it adds to the status of the movie, if you will, as this just force, this
Yeah.
epic. So I'd say the dialogue. My thorn, which I guess could also be considered a bud, is the way in which they handle time in this movie. It is so confusing. Now, the Bible isn't exactly explicit saying, okay, this all happened in 3 weeks. The Exodus story isn't exactly handled that way.
Yeah.
But especially in the second half of this movie, when Moses goes to Midian, like you can judge the time based on his beard and the color of his hair and things like that. And I'm like, in between plagues like 3 and 4, were there 5 years? Your hair got a lot whiter.
Yeah.
It got the beard got longer, and so that kind of stuff took me out of the movie a little bit. Um, Almost if they were to have established a timeline, like you know, like 10 years before the Exodus, and then it shows that portion. I think I would have liked it a little bit more, because it just took me out a little bit the change. Because obviously this is a long period of time, but the longest period of, well, what was it? I forget who said it. It's like Moses had 3 different periods in his life. He had his first period when he was really an Egyptian, then Midian, and then leading the Israelites in the wilderness. There were like 3 separate times. But it just is very, very confusing, in my opinion. That doesn't necessarily take away from it as just enjoying it, but it's just something I noticed for sure. My final thing is all the women in this movie look the same.
Okay. Confession time. When I was younger, I couldn't tell the difference between in the early parts. I couldn't tell the difference between Nefertiti and Bithia. I was like, which one's Moses' mom and which one's his girlfriend?
I
like,
literally,
should he be kissing this woman? Or I was just like, who are you? Can we have name tags?
I have a confession to make. When I texted you about that, the first part of this movie, low-key, like somehow, and it's hard to describe other than the movie is in love with Moses. I texted that when Nefertiti is like welcoming Moses back. I low-key thought that was Bithia. I was like, what?
Yeah.
This is wild. Yeah, so I couldn't really tell. And that just like it still kind of confused me. I really wish there were name tags. That would have made this movie really interesting. Okay, our final thing we're going to talk about is who we think each other are. And I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going with mine, but I want to hear yours.
Okay.
Who do you think I am?
I think you are Aaron.
Okay.
Because
a unit.
Yes, a unit. Moses' brother. I think the reason I chose this for you is I don't even know if I necessarily based this. It's hard because it's hard who I know these characters are biblically,
right,
and like who they are in this movie. So this may be just more of an Aaron like from the Bible. But Aaron is Moses' mouthpiece. Right? He's Moses, like you said, he's believed to have had a stutter, had trouble talking, and he even addresses this with when he meets God in the burning bush. He's like, "What will I say?"
Right.
Like, how will I speak? And so Aaron is sent with Moses to be his mouthpiece when he can't speak. Right? When Moses goes before Pharaoh the first time and asks them to be let go, and Ramesses cuts the straw ration, but expects the same amount of bricks, essentially making their lives worse than their already terrible lives in slavery. When Moses goes to explain this, he goes to Goshen, which, shout out Goshen, that's my hometown, is Goshen, Indiana, named after the Hebrew town of Goshen. Had to plug that in here. Anyways, when Moses goes to Goshen to be like, yeah, so I screwed up. Y'all work just got a lot harder. Like, who is the one that like smooths things over? It's Aaron. And why does this remind me of you? Because you always know what to say. When no one knows what to say, you always know what to say.
I appreciate that.
You always have a word, something to say. And it's usually the correct thing to say. You
I
don't bat
appreciate
you
that.
don't bat 1,000 because none of us do, but
No, I
I
bet 2,000. Um, I no, I really appreciate that. Um, so
and
we're actually kind of
there's my one nice comparison. So that gives me a month more of roast comparisons.
right because I made this a roast comparison.
I love it. I love it. Hit it.
Uh,
Hit me with it.
you are Dathan because you rule Goshen. every time, every time they said Goshen, all I could think of was like Jake. every time. And so you're Dathan purely because you're you're like the king of Goshen. But no, I really every time they
shoot.
said Goshen, I thought of Jake. So except that you are absolutely nothing like the character of Dathan, other than the fact that you lived in Goshen.
G Town. No one
G
calls it
Town.
G. No one calls it G Town.
Yeah. So that is
That's funny.
that's my so I was like every week I have something nice to say. I said this week
You've earned your
I
roast.
have to. I
You've
have
earned the
to.
roast. You've earned the
Yes.
roast.
So you're Dathan because of Goshen. And that's the only reason why. Now, if you're to live in, Mishawaka, you wouldn't be Dathan. I don't know who you'd be. I didn't think that far. I just thought of Dathan because of Goshen. But
Oh shoot.
anyway, this movie is fantastic. It's really well known. It's a classic film. It is a genre epic. It is one of the most well known and arguably one of the first really big epic films.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make sure we covered it this week. And so we had I would say we had a very interesting discussion. It really kind of encapsulated a lot of the different elements of the movie. Obviously, I still have more notes, but we're not going to go into everything.
Yeah. I think this rewatch made me appreciate this movie more, right? Looking at it from a more analytic side really made me appreciate this movie more and like the grandeur of this movie.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
Really, that's why we do this channel, is because a lot of these movies we've seen before. I don't think, other than Glory Road and Some Like It Hot, I'd seen all the movies we had done at least once.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also to kind of give people fresh eyes in seeing it. Or if you've seen it, to each time you watch a movie, you're going to pull something different from it.
Yeah.
And if you watch it enough, then you'll be able to quote it. And then you'll be me quoting Revenge of the Sith all the time. But literally, there's one time, and then I'll shut up. There was one time where I was with Adam and Emily, and I went to the bathroom, and the bathroom's right off their living room. And so Adam, Emily, and Sam were in the living room, and I was in the bathroom. And I forgot where I was, I guess, because I looked in the mirror, and as Obi-Wan, I go, hello there. I walk out of the bathroom.
Oh, and you wonder why you're single.
And Sam goes, have a good time in there, Kenobi? So I do that way too frequently. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed this movie. We're doing this on Passover for a reason. This is a very well-known film when it comes to Passover and Easter. So, and it's really funny. Closing ideas here. I almost suggested that we do the first 2 Harry Potter movies, and the reason why is because I couldn't tell you the year, but there was one Easter where I got the first 2 Harry Potter movies on DVD. And I watched them back to back twice. And I had a portable DVD player, and I sat and I watched those movies. And I will always associate Easter with Harry Potter. Now, you actually have those copies of those DVDs because they gave them to you. Because I have Blu-ray versions now, but I will always remember the first 2 Harry Potter movies, sitting there and watching those during Easter. But I'm glad we did 10 Commandments. I think that probably was a smarter decision.
More on brand, I think. But
more on brand.
That's a neat story.
More on brand. Anyway, What do you guys think? Have you seen the Ten Commandments? Have you read the Ten Commandments? I don't know. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. We love hearing from you. If you like what you see, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ring the bell to get notifications on all upcoming content. We do this every single week and really enjoy it. Make sure to follow us on our social media channels. You can follow us on Instagram at CinephilePod. You can follow Jake at Jake_Biller. And you can follow me at _Ben Sparrow. I remembered all three of those. If I got them wrong, you'll see it.
They're on
down
your screen.
Below. They're on our screen. But yeah, what do we have? What do we
so
have
next
on
week?
next
I'm
week?
very excited for next week. Next week is my pick because next week marks the 162nd anniversary of the Battle of Fort Sumter. It's the beginning of the Civil War. So I'm quite the Civil War nerd. So buckle up for that episode. But
You're kidding.
We'll be watching Lincoln.
Okay.
Yes, that's
Steven Spielberg.
It's a replica cavalry saber right over there. So don't mess with me. I got a sword.
What a dork.
I'm very much a dork. So I will try and keep the Civil War trivia to a minimum next week. But no, I'm very excited for this because not only is this a very good Civil War movie, it's a very good movie in general.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So return next week. We'll be talking about Lincoln. For Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. And cut.